There we go. Yes! I did it! Trauma livery for the Carrick, Cutter, Pisces, and Zeus awarded for your allegiance to the headhunters during the fight. For Pyro, the slog for Pyro. Good lord, it's over. The Fight for Pyro, the second chapter of Save Stanton, Star Citizen's latest narrative event, for me, is finally over. And, well, it was a bit underwhelming, wasn't it?
Violence continues as another civilian vessel has been ambushed just moments after leaving a station in the orbit.
Save Stanton Chapter 1, from my perspective, was a pretty good time. The story was simple. We had a new faction, the Slicers, assaulting Stanton, and a pretty unique trailer to provide a different perspective of the verse and background lore that we hadn't really seen before to set the stage. And while yes, it was yet another Stanton incursion being dealt with by the goddamn civilian defense force, it was easy to follow and a good setup for what felt like a bigger climax in the next chapter.
Always rush to blame Pyro, calling to shut down the jump point. Let us not paint the people of an entire system with too broad a brush.
Not to mention, the Polaris was finally in players' hands, and we had a good reason to use it for some epic 20 FPS fleet battle and Idris boarding goodness. And while this mission chain was filled with typical Star Citizen issues preventing players from completing it in a timely, FOMO-induced manner, or completing it at all, I had somehow been spared the pain, with everything going quite well for once. But it pretty much began to go downhill from there. The final chapter of Save Stanton now required the player to run the same limited commodity supply mission 6 times, creating confusion and tedium for the majority of players as the commodities required were now sold out for extended periods of time due to everyone buying them at the exact same time to finish the chapter, and CIG hadn't decreased the commodity refresh timers in preparation. You're also now required to pick a faction to support moving into Chapter 2, based on pretty much nothing, with most people just choosing the faction whose supply mission commodities were the easiest to acquire in the wake of the availability disaster. We were told our choice here would have consequences later on, but unless I missed something, Chapter 1 had no real impact and was simply overwritten when we were given a new faction choice in Chapter 2. Need someone to take a run at the convoy and knock out those supply ships and escorts before they reach their destination. Alright, let's try this one. Okay, that one accepted, the previous one didn't. 298k. After again choosing a faction based on relatively shallow information in the boring sub-menu of the journal, or slightly less shallow information on CIG's marketing page, where most of us were so invested in the storyline and our respective factions that we simply made our choice based on whose reward skin looked best buried in a forum post, you are now tasked with, once again, completing a string of 6 contracts, composed of 2 generic mission types for said faction. The same missions we've been doing for the better half of a decade. Go here, find this, destroy this, kill this, leave, and repeat. And this would be fine if we were doing less of them and it felt like I was progressing the story with each completed mission versus simply ticking a box in a journal entry 6 times over. To make matters worse, players were dealing with broken elevators, dead hangars, connectivity issues, and a bunch of other game-breaking bugs, much like 324, which were made worse for some players with 4.0 and server meshing's arrival. These all contributed to making the time-limited FOMO event more difficult to complete for many backers, and as someone with more time and patience than your average citizen, I have to feel bad for the guys who struggle to get through this between living busy lives.
Oh,
What?
what is going on?
Huh?
We are not landing on my screen. We are spiraling off into the distance.
On top of this, you now couldn't share or complete Phase 2 missions with your friends. So if you wanted to play through these missions with someone else, you'd need to do 12 missions instead of 6 to finish the phases. And then, of course, many of the missions simply didn't work. I think I got off lightly in Phase 1, but during Phase 2, many of the locations for the missions were simply broken. Sometimes mission text didn't populate properly, and when I was told to fly all the way across the system to destroy enemy faction assets, they often didn't spawn. Is this Headhunters controlled again? I bet it is. It is. No assets yet again. Can you see any?
No.
Oh, this is a joke. Plus, this is Headhunter's territory. So if I kill all these guys, I'm going to get negative rep in the faction I'm supposed to be doing the missions for. Yikes, man. Not good. Contracted by headhunters, go to the headhunters outpost and destroy all the assets. Not going too well today, my friends, is it? I am getting tired, man. I'm getting tired. I eventually managed to finish Phase 2, and my FOMO quest was over. But there are more phases to come. Phase 3 for me as a headhunter involves a repeatable mission to wipe out the frontier fighters and take back the territory they'd taken in Pyro before both factions turned on them for actually being the slicers in disguise.
Gotcha, bitch.
In a comment on Star Citizen's YouTube page, I think the Astropub said it best with regards to the frontier fighters' twist and CIG's storytelling. As much as I love that story is finally coming to the game, if you're forcing players to commit to a faction with long-term consequences and then planning on revealing twists with those factions, you are setting yourself up for failure. If players aren't given the ability to determine what a faction's true intent is before they're locked in, or not given an off-ramp when the twist is revealed, players simply won't participate because they would feel the game is lying to them. Again, this comes down to clear signposting and in-game storytelling via 21st century means. Star Citizen is supposed to be a next-gen game, but CIG is out of touch if they believe the majority of players are going to spend time reading deeply into dull mobiGlas subtext and journal entries in order to break down and enjoy a time-limited narrative event that feels more like a race against the clock to complete versus an enjoyable narrative adventure. I mean, what the hell's happened with all these incredibly cool characters that CIG was using to give us missions in the past? We haven't had a new one for over 5 years. They just stopped.
The devil's in the details, I believe. Read them well.
Okay, there's a satellite that's fallen from orbit and it has a prototype blade in it we want to check out.
There is now a new phase currently cooking on PTU, which feels like Pyro's answer to Jumptown, a much more open-ended and player-oriented event, which sounds like it'll have future implications on the Pyro system, and I look forward to seeing how this one plays out.
The story doesn't end here.
I'll keep them occupied.
The way that this story ultimately is intending to play out, there are actually going to be real ramifications based on the group community choices that are made. So that will actually change the direction of the universe. Or it can either go one way or it can go the other way. So we're actually going to be playing around a lot with ways that players can decide how they want the universe to change. So moving forward, there's going to be a bit of a twist that comes down the road, which is going to escalate basically the situation into one of our first big events. With this, it basically allows us to plan out a bit more and actually, again, start to build a growing narrative.
Although it definitely needs more time to cook before it goes anywhere near the live servers. Since half of the event relies on freight elevators functioning, in my experience on the PTU so far, these have been broken the majority of the time. With more to come in the form of narrative content throughout the year, here's a list of things I would like to see to improve the experience for all of us. Grabbing important narrative-based quests through a dull, lifeless contract manager needs to stop. These are fine for your average, everyday contracts, but if this is how one-time, narrative-driven events are going to continue to be offered to us, players will simply treat them like any other everyday mission. There's been a lot of talk about the return of NPC mission givers over the last year and a half. It would be great to see the return of animated mission givers along with the ongoing mission refactor. And I'm not asking for fully fledged brand new hero NPCs to facilitate these quests, but give us some representatives to talk to, a comms call to receive or a voice recording on a datapad to discover, something that tells the story through in-game features versus the blurb on a marketing page and context providing forum posts. This is simply unacceptable for a game like this in 2025. Ultimately, I want the game the devs are excited to tell us about in these videos versus the one we're actually playing. I would really like to see these missions provide reputational gains. Grinding rep for factions is, for some reason, painstakingly slow and completely unintuitive, and it was disappointing to see there was no rep gain for any of the phases of these missions. I'd like CIG to incorporate reputational gains in the future if they can, so there's a little more weight to these missions and lasting incentive for players to complete them. Finally, while these events succeed at their intention to bump up player concurrency for a limited time, I don't think the time-limited engagement is overall healthy for the player base, some of whom only feel obligated to put themselves through particularly unplayable updates in order to complete the event and get the one-time reward, which just creates resentment from your community. It's a double-edged sword. It also kinda sucks that these events, which are sold as important world-building narratives, won't ever happen again for new players or are not being utilized to build up the foundation of narrative mission content for the 1.0 future of the game that CIG is supposed to be moving towards now. I understand CIG's ability to build bigger and better missions should improve in the future, and thus these missions may become obsolete, even though it currently feels like we're going backwards. But I can't help but feel a lot of the work and story building of these events is being wasted when the event is over and the work is essentially thrown to the wind. These events should be new, permanent additions and one-time unlockable quest chains, like any other MMO, that other players and new accounts can unlock and play throughout the game's lifetime to reap the rewards and develop their narrative, or to even go back and play it from a different perspective. Simply put, why isn't all this energy, time and money going into making better, permanent additions and rewards to the finished game versus these temporary, limited additions to the alpha? I know the reason why, but I think I speak for most people when I say we would prefer the former. As always, huge thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on the events in the comments below, and huge thank you to my media members for your incredibly generous support, and welcome to my latest member, Tom Eastlake. Goodbye.